I guess the second most problematical technique in tying for wet flies is wings. And there's no doubt at all about it that you need to spend a little time to perfect those techniques. And probably the two main reasons why people have problems is this. First and foremost, they don't pre-select the material and get prep the wing material in the first place correctly. And secondly, the technique of tying down in the wing to the hook shank also is the issue that creates further problems. So I'm going to try and help you out with those problems right now. But first of all, just take a quick glance at these materials I've got on the table. All of these constitute structural material that can be used for wings. It doesn't matter whether it's feather flight wing quills, whether it's body feathers, whatever. Center tail feathers, flank hackle, all this, whatever. All of this constitutes material that can form wings for wet flies. Structure of most wings on wet flies amounts to two feathers when we're dealing with what we call solid fiber wing structure. That is two quills taken from the left side and the right side of the bird. And the things that you need to pay serious attention to are this. First and foremost, when you're using what we call a left and a right side, is that as near as practically possible, both of those feathers are equal. In other words, if you look at them structurally, they're pretty much the same. Look at them from this way on, they're pretty much the same. Look at it from this way on, they're pretty much the same. In other words, what you're looking for is the same width of fiber with the same degree of curvature. If there's a difference, you're going to get some little problems there when you try to match them up. But I'm going to show you a technique that somewhat eliminates using a left and or right side. And it's particularly useful for the smaller flies. If you're tying very large wet flies like this, that may be a little different, and you need to pair up what we call left side and right side. And in some cases with the more involved patterns, you're going to have married wings, which are typically like you would see on an Atlantic salmon fly. You're going to have variations of different colors, red, white, blue, whichever the case may be. Fact of the matter is, the tying technique is exactly the same regardless. Okay, now let's just have a closer look at this. If you look at this feather, pretty much I would disregard any of this fiber at this low end, for the simple reason it's got too much acute curvature to it and it doesn't have good structure. So I'm going to literally tear that off out the way. When we come up the stem of the feather, look how it kind of feathers out like this. As you come up, you find it starts to get very stiff and structured. In other words, it's kind of getting really straight here off the end, and it's not good. So pretty much I'm going to tell you somewhere in that region, right about there, and you can crank this back like about there, that's going to constitute about the best structural fiber you're going to find on a regular duck quill. And that's going to be pretty much the same to the other side also. See this here? It's short in fiber, it doesn't have a nice definitive curvature structure to it. Get rid of it, it's no use. And then pretty much around about same thing about here. That's going to be pretty much about good there. In fact, to be honest about it, if you really want to do away with the rubbish, just literally cut it off out the way, and you've got rid of it. And you've got good feather. Okay. So ideally you're going to have a left and right and that pair up exactly the same by structure, curvature, and everything else. That's a good start. What we're going to do is this. We're going to section out one section from the left and one section from the right. And depending on the size of the hook you're using, or the fly you're tying, shall we say, that would have a relative factor so far as what width of fiber you're going to take out. But if you take on average, most size 10, 12, 14 wet fly hook sizes, you're going to be looking at something in the region of about that. Just a little over maybe 1/8 of an inch. And this is the way to do it. Use your Davy needle, section that out, and then just very, very gently cut out that section and lay that down. And do exactly the same for the opposing side. In fact, I usually do it with the tip of my scissors like this. Alright, now I'm doing something on purpose here just to show you, because what I've done, I've made one a little larger than the other, and there's a reason for this. Okay, now look real closely. Both of these wing slips at this point of time are with the curvature facing towards me. And that's okay, because one of them needs to remain that way. What you're then going to do is turn one of those over in the opposite direction. And this is a real neat trick. Get your Davy needle, stick it into the wing quill like this, pick that one up, and very gently just place that more or less in exactly the same position as the second. Somewhere in the region like this, so you can pick the two together up. Because I've watched people trying to pick these little slips up off the table together. Okay, now grasp them with your left hand there and pair them up so they're pretty much in the same alignment. Now on purpose what I did is I cut one of those wing slips slightly larger than the other, and unless you're kind of real good at doing it, you're pretty much going to be a little out. So what you're going to do is this: you're going to pair them up and get one leading edge exactly the same as the other, and then you're going to use your dubbing needle and you're just going to set that in there like that and separate those fibers, pull those out like that, and then what you should ultimately end up with is two fibers of exactly the same width, equally paired together. The curvatures are facing each other so that the fibers themselves compress together this way. That's what makes them tight, like here. And they're equal width and pretty much exactly the same. Okay, now what we're going to do is add a thread base. You don't actually have to tie the fly to learn how to put wings on. What it is a thread base to start with. So we're going to do that. We're just going to wrap essentially a thread base there. Now, there's two arguments or two trains of thought, whichever way you want to look at that, so far as what is the right or the wrong way to set wings. Now, if you look at these wing quills real carefully, you will see that they are what we define as in a downswept position. In other words, the long fibers are at the lower side, the shorter fibers are at the upper. Okay, so that's like in a downswept position. And you could mount the wing on the fly in that position if you chose to do that. My personal preference, if I'm using two slips, is not to do that. It is actually to reverse it so that the wing is tied with what we define as an upswept position. In other words, the longer fibers are up above and the shorter fibers are below. And actually it's a stronger wing, strangely enough. It tends not to break apart easy. It's pretty much when it's on the fly and you're fishing, it tends to stay exactly where you want it to be. Okay, now you're going to set the wing on the fly. And this is the part that gives people issues. And it amounts to this. And watch very, very carefully what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to use my right hand to make the assessment of wing length related to hook size. Well, that's too long, so we're going to come back a little closer and we're going to say that's somewhere around about right. First and foremost, make sure that your thread is in exactly the position where the wings are going to be set down. Secondly, if you have a thread that tends to flatten, you need to tighten it. In other words, rotate that bobbin until you start to see the thread twist up tight like this, because tight thread crimps fiber, flat thread flattens fiber. And objectively what you want to do is crimp that wing down as hard as you can, very, very quickly. Okay, so here's our wing, and we're going to hold it above the hook shank to where we've got the assessed position. Okay, we're going to go there. Now, don't move the right hand. Take the thumb and the second finger of the right hand and make sure that the feather fiber just touches the hook. Don't push it down, don't compress it. Just let it touch the hook. Bring up the thread in between the fingers, slack turn, bring it over the top of the material. As soon as you start to see the thread move that material, compress the hook, the feather fiber, and the thread, and very, very gently just take tension on that thread one time and just leave it where it's at. If you don't have that wing centrally set above the shank of that hook, as you see there, you've got it twisted round to the side. Do not continue to wind thread any further because you're not going to achieve anything. It's messed up before you start. Okay, demonstrate that again. Here's your wing. Set it to the position you want it to actually be tied in. Hold it above the shank of the hook. Bring the thread up. Pinch and loop. As soon as you start to see the thread touch the wing material, pinch it. Set the thread down with tight tension. And typically we'd have a wing set that way anyway. We would then pull up the butts, snip those off, and continue with whip finish to finish the head of the fly. That's the first method, where you're pairing up left side and right side. Now this is another method, and I use this myself for a lot of different reasons. First and foremost, you eliminate having to pair feather up, but secondly, you build a solid wing structure, which is no different to what you're doing with the left and right quill in the first place. So watch real careful what we're going to do. We're going to take out our section of feather like this, and we're going to double the width. In other words, if we use, for example, 1/8 of an inch width for each left and right side, what essentially we're going to do there is double that up and make 1/4 inch. And so you just set that out like this. Now, watch very carefully what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold that fiber out at right angles to the stem. And ultimately what I'm looking forward to do is to get the whole fiber structure, what I would call nearly squared off at the end. So there's no curvature like this. In other words, you pulled it out. Okay? And then grip that fairly firmly like this. You can go one or two ways here. You can either tear it off or you can cut it off. But as long as you maintain the grip there, you won't distort the fiber. See that? It's still maintained in the position that I took it from there. But what I'm then going to do is just cut off those butts like this. Right, next thing. It looks a little easier than it is, but it's really not that difficult. Hold the fiber real gently in your right hand, and with these two fingers just kind of bring it around like that until you bring a center part fold to it. You see that? So you've essentially built a structure of a solid wing by folding one strip in half. And then what we then do is we offer that to the fly and set that down on top of the hook around about the right position right there. And again, the standard pinch and loop technique, up, over, start to see compression, bind it down. One wrap of thread. We checked it. Is it looking good? Fine. Once you've got that assessed in right position, 1, 2, 3, make security turns. One little tip I'm going to give you. When you go to cut off the wing butts, always hold the feather. Always hold the wing. Because sometimes if you don't have 100% pure sharp scissors, it'll catch that material, pull it or twist it. So just maintain a real positive grip right there when you nip that off. And then of course you just come forward and you make a real neat head. And whip finish. Now, wildfowl flank feathers are commonly used for a lot of the traditional wet flies. Bronze mallard or brown mallard, call it what you like. That's kind of like the top of the shoulder feathers off a mallard drake. Wood duck flank and teal. A lot of flies use these feathers, but they're not the easiest feathers in the world to form for good wing structure. Now, on a large fly, I would advocate that to some extent you would go for a left side and a right side and pair those up. However, I'm going to show you a technique that pretty much is all you need to know so far as the smaller flies are concerned, 8, 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s. And it's very similar, in fact, to the technique I showed you with the solid wing, duck wing core fiber here. What is important is that you find material that's good structure. That's absolutely an important factor. You see, most of this stuff is about worthless, so you can kind of strip that out. What I'm looking for is this good solid structure in the wing material that when I separate it like this from the quill, again I can pull it out at a kind of like a squared right angle. That's the way to explain that one to you. If you see how this is more structured out like this as a square angle. And same thing also for the bronze mallard. See, this here has got a little bit too much curvature for my liking. I'm going to come a little bit further up until I start to see that edge kind of straighten up a touch. So same thing here, we're just going to go in there, and I use my fingernail for that, but whatever you mean you do it, that's okay. And trying to pull that out, and see what we're looking for is to try and get a thickness of fiber that kind of squares off at the end, or as close as you can get to it, like that. Okay, you can see. Alrighty. Now, this is a much, shall we say, finer fiber structure than duck wing quill. And pretty much you go a little bit more by, shall we say, the amount you're actually going to need to tie a good structured wing. So in the case of, say, an average size 10 or 12 hook fly, we're probably going to go about here, because there's two ways you can actually apply this wing. First one is, of course, is that you separate the fibers and you get them into a nice, what I call squared off end structure like that. When you've got them that way, either cut them off or tear them off. That's entirely up to you which way you do it. In the case of a lot of the quill of this nature, I tend to fold this 3 times. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go on the side 1 time, and then I'm going to go overside a 2nd time. And by doing that, what I've done is I built a 3-layered structure of the wing. Folded it over. In fact, you can do it 4 times also, depending on the width of the fiber that you cut out. I'll show you that again. Let's take this wood duck, separate the fiber out. See, it's nice and squared on the end. Cut out the section that you need. Watch again, real careful. And it's up to you. You can do upper or lower. It depends which way you choose to. I prefer to do it from the low side. So I'm just going to go underneath here, about 1/3. And I'm going to do exactly the same over the top. Another 1/3. And then you see I build up a nice solid structure of wing, which is really no different from making a left or a right side. You're actually building quite a stronger wing by doing it by that method. Okay, and we're going to tie that in. And we're just going to make a thread base right here. The technique of tying is essentially exactly the same. First and foremost, assess correctly wing length by holding it in the right. When you've got that assessed to where you need it to be, transfer from right to left. Make sure the material is held right down on top of the shank of the hook, not left side or right side, right on top. Bring the thread up with that soft slack turn or pinch and loop. As soon as you start to see the thread bite, grip firmly, take the thread down. 1 turn. Okay, if that wing is not centered to the absolute upper part of the hook shank is over to the left or the right, or you got it twisted, don't take no more turns of thread. The first wrap of thread is going to put it exactly in the right position. Anything else is just trying to correct a bad issue. Okay, when I've got that exactly where I need it to be, and I know it's there, I'm just going to back hold the wing. 2, 3. I know it's not going to move from there. I'm going to lift this up. Make sure we're clear. Hold the wing. Cut off the excess. 2, 3. That completes binding down the roots of the wing, and then we're finished. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Bear in mind you would have, of course, the body and the hackle of the fly tied prior to that, but it does make no difference. Wing tying is, or wing setting is wing setting. If you do it right, you do it right, and if you do it wrong, you do it wrong. Okay, so we dealt with side wings and what I call soft fiber flank wings. Now we're going to move on to another technique that relates to another material, and it's probably one of the more difficult materials to use to actually set a good wing on, but it's used an awful lot in traditional flies, and that's hen pheasant center tail. And ideally what you want is a center tail quill, or one to the left or one to the right, that's got good solid structure of fiber like this. And again, you've got 2 options here. You can take out one section to the left and one section to the right, if you choose to do it that way, and snip that one out there and that one out there, and then you pick the 2 up. There's another little trick I was going to tell you too, I didn't get around to do it. If you kind of moisten the tip of your finger like this, and you can pick the fiber up, see that? And you can do the same with the other, pick the fiber up. But remember the curvature of the feather, both sides faces each other. I'm going to put this one on top of that one, and form our wing structure. Now there's another option so far as tying this particular feather fibre in, and that's this. Similar again to what we used with the soft fibre duckwing flank. Section out a piece of the material like this and pull that out at right angles to the stem. Now you kind of got to do this without loosening any of the material. Pretty much I know it's going to be exactly where I want it, like that. I'm going to tear it off like that. And what I'm then going to do is very, very carefully just bring those butt sections to a point where I can, what we use in time terminology, is remarry those fibres back together. In other words, what I've done, I've constructed a solid mat of fibre like that. And then hold that there like this, and we cut off the excess because we don't need that. We can't effect a good fold anyway. Now bear in mind also that the face of the feather that you see is the outside of your wing, not the inside. So in other words, that's the face of the feather that faces you, and then literally just make one center fold like that. And what you've done, you've built up a nice solid structure to the wing, which is the way I prefer to do my wings on flies that incorporate the use of hen, pheasant, centertail. And then, as before, we're just going to offer that up to the fly, get our proportionate value of wing length correct, offer it down very gently to the top of the fly, thread up, pinch and loop, grip firmly, tight one-turn wrapper thread, make sure the wing's set exactly where we want it to be. Yeah, it is. And then we continue with the wrap and get that all down, cut off the excess and bind down over the roots of the wing and complete our whip finish. Peacock sword. There are a few flies that use that, but probably the one that's better known more than anything else is the Alexander. In fact, the fly I caught my first brown trout on. It's still a favourite fly of mine, particularly for brown trout, no question of a doubt about it. But it's not an easy material to work with, even I'll tell you that. There's times it just chooses to do what it wants to do, and you end up throwing it away. Okay, this is a peacock sword feather. And what we're looking for is the fibre that's more in the midsection to make a good wing. Not so much these long strands here. These are okay for a lot of salmon fly tines, but pretty much for the trout flies we're looking for something in this region here. And again, we're going to grip these fibres and cut out a section of those like this. The one thing this material won't tolerate is being messed around with. It's kind of a different structure to pretty much any other feather fibre. So once you've sectioned it out, try to maintain a fairly firm grip to it, and then kind of just turn that around upside down so the face side of all those, this like here, faces you. And then, okay, what I tend to do is this. I just kind of just very, very gently just roll those fibres together like that. And then we bring them over to the hook. And as before, pinch and loop, set the wing above the fly. There's another technique that I use also, and I've never really seen anybody else do it, and I'm not saying it's not out there, but it amounts to this. This is a woodcock wing, for example, and I could do pretty much the same thing from a snipe wing or any other, what I would define more as kind of a soft hackle bird feather structure. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to section out here one feather, and what I'm going to ultimately look for is that section of feather is kind of left and right equal center to the stem of the feather quill. Because what we're going to do, we're going to tie in what I define as more a whole feather wing, or shall we say hackle, to form the wing of the fly. So preparation is the important thing to start with. Okay, and as you can see, this kind of structure of feather lends itself perfectly to caddisfly imitations, because it's just effectively marked that way. Now watch what I'm going to do. Obviously we've tied the body of the fly, and very carefully I'm just going to kind of gently start to roll and compress those fibres together like that. You see that? So what I've got essentially is this. I've built that into a kind of a nice little solid wing there. Got that? Just like that. Okay? And what we're then going to do is hold that by the standard traditional pinch and loop technique, above the wing, sorry, above the hook. Take the thread up, make sure we've got that centrally positioned, and there you can see we've built a nice solid wing with a solid hackle technique. And it's very, very useful, let me tell you, because some feathers, to make good wing structures of that coloration, well, in fact, you're not going to find them. But hackles serve a real perfect purpose for that. And that gives you a perfect wing for caddis-type imitation flies. There's a certain style of fly known as Clyde-style flies, or shall we say, or flies of that kind of nature, that use a very, very small forward set wing. And that wing is typically obtained from either starling or snipe or something like that. It's a light colored feather. And I'm going to show you how to do that, because a lot of people have terrible trouble. They assume that you make left and right pairs at the bottom end. Well, yeah, you can go about it that way, but I'm going to show you a real quick, efficient way to make a perfect wing for those styles of flies. Because it's a single strand wing. It's not a left and a right together. It's one little wing that sits up, looks like a little sailboat, typical of a dun. Okay, what I'm looking for is good solid structure somewhere around about the upper part of the wing quill. Right there. And we're going to just pull that out like that, so we have again got that kind of squarish angle to the wing. And let me just set the thread on the hook here. Those flies are really good too, you know. They're real short bodied flies. Typically you tie a little short thread body to the fly, or about halfway the shank length of the hook. You come forward, a couple of little turns of sparse hackle and a little tiny forward wing, which we're going to demonstrate right here. Okay, here's the wing fiber. Remember that you've got the curvature going this way, and when you fold the wing, you're going to make sure the curvature faces itself. Okay, let's cut that out. Remember I said way in the beginning of this program, the finer, the sharper pointed scissors you've got, the way easier it is to work with, particularly with a lot of these fine delicate materials. Okay, now we're just going to fold that in half, very gently like that, and we're going to bring that forward. Alright, now, contrary to what you would normally do with a wet fly wing, and I know a lot of people find this a little strange, you're actually going to tie this wing forward of the eye of the hook. And so we're going to set it back there like this. We're going to come up with our pinch and loop, push it right the way back in. As soon as you start to see some compression on the material, grip the material and the thread and the hook. 2, 3. Lift the wing up, take a few turns in front, and as you can see, you've got a beautiful little forward extending wing. Typically what we would do then, we would come back and bind down the butts of that wing, and then come forward, and we would tie in a little hackle 2 or 3 turns just behind the wing at that point, and then we would come forward and finish off with our whip finish. And that's what we call the kind of like the Clyde style typical wet fly wing technique.